Hi everyone, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. I'm Dan Clark and this is episode number 14. And today I'm joined by Patrik Svensson, the creator of both the Cake build system and also a library called Spectre console. And it's this library that we'll be talking about today. But I'm sure we can certainly touch upon Cake too, especially now that it's recently hit V1. So a big, massive welcome to the show, Patrik.
Oh, thank you. Very nice to be here.
You're most welcome. So before we start, could you give us a quick intro into your background and what it is you're up to nowadays?
Yeah, sure. My name is Patrik Svensson, like you said. I'm 39 years old, come from Sweden. I've been working as a programmer for, I think, 16 years now. But I've been programming most of my life. Like you, I'm running my own little consultancy company, one-person thing.
So Spectre console, I remember seeing this on Twitter when you mentioned that you were creating this, and it's been one of those things that's been on my list to play with for quite some time. But I'll hang my head up in shame. Up until now, I haven't done. But last week I did have a play around with it, and wow, I've kind of been missing out. I've written a lot of console apps in my time, and pretty much all of them would have benefited from this. I went through your documentation and trying out all the different things it could do, and each individual component and thing you can do. I think if I had £1 for every time that I said, oh, wow, as I was going through the documentation and trying out all the different things, I'd probably have quite a few pounds. I'm sure we can dig into each of the different bits and components throughout this episode. But what would be your high-level elevator pitch of what Spectre console is?
Writing console applications in .NET is fairly simple, but it's not that simple making them beautiful. It's quite limited when it comes to like colors. It only supports the normal 4-bit color palette, and that's about it. You can clear the screen, move the cursor a bit. But since the 70s, there's been this way of controlling the terminal, so to say, with something called VT escape sequences, virtual terminal, also called ANSI escape sequences. You can really control how the terminal works, and you can have alternate buffers and style your text like bold and blinking text and stuff like that. But there is no way in .NET to do all this. Of course, you can write these escape codes yourself, but you need to know, does the terminal support these kinds of escape codes? Like if you're using an old cmd.exe on Windows 8, it doesn't. On Windows 10, you can actually upgrade the console to support ANSI escape codes. So even though theoretically you can write these codes yourself, it's not very nice experience if you're trying to do it manually. So I've actually been using another library called Rich for Python before, and I really liked it because it's like an abstraction over ANSI escape codes, and it also adds a concept of widgets like tables and grids and stuff like that. So I was actually missing Rich on .NET because .NET is my main, C# is my main language, and .NET is the main platform I work with. So I started porting small bits of Rich over to .NET. Of course, I changed some things around and things that weren't very idiomatic for C#. But not sure, I'm rambling a lot here, but but that's more or less why I did it and the main reason for creating it.
No, that's really cool. Looking through the documentation, it's really well documented. I found that as soon as I jumped to it, I could pick up all the different components, and I actually tried and went through each of the different components and copied the examples into a console app project in Rider. And it took me like 30 seconds to try each one. It was so quick. So it was certainly very well documented. And just looking through the list of components you've got, as you mentioned, things like list boxes, tables and things, you've got a really nice animation on your homepage showing a table being programmatically adjusted, that the column widths, all the different stylings and stuff. And it almost feels like some of the functionality you'd expect in a GUI with different components, except this is within a console application. So it's just, I'm just going to find this so useful moving forward. Looking through the list, most of them I would find very useful, but there's some that jump out, which are kind of stand out as I would use more often than others. And I think the most would be the selection and multiple selection, where like the selection is almost like a list box, and then the multiple selection is a list of ASCII-based checkboxes.
Yeah.
And just being able to plug that into a console application, I think so many console applications I use would benefit from that kind of UI almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm using Spectre console for a lot of stuff, both personally and at work, and really makes it easy to create great console applications, if I may say so myself.
You may, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, even things like just like markup, being able to like do markup, colors, and like text layouts. So one of the examples was showing multiple columns. So almost like you're styling it in CSS kind of thing, where you've got like 3 different columns of text, and just being able to do this in console apps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you mean the grid example, I think.
Yeah, there was, and let me just get up.
Yeah, on the start page.
Yeah, so the main image you've got, which has lots of different examples, and it shows the text, and you've got like the green on the left, the yellow in the center, and the blue on the right. Just being able to do stuff like that. And for the listeners, I will include a link to this, obviously, in the show notes, so you can see these. Yeah, so it's got like this one big image. Obviously, it's a podcast, so I'm trying to explain it verbally, but we've got like showing lots of different colors you can select, styles like bold, italic, underline, strike through, and lots of others, and blinking text, markup, emojis, tables, charts. You can do bar charts as well. This is quite nice, actually. I'm sure most developers doing console apps have seen exceptions in their output. They've got like pretty colored exceptions, so you can support that as well, and lots of other stuff. I think my biggest what was when I saw the canvas image and I saw you could literally take a PNG and render it to the console. That was like amazing.
Oh yeah, that's actually powered by ImageSharp. Do you know the library ImageSharp?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a very, very nice image library when you need to work with images and stuff like that. So what I've done is you're actually using the ImageSharp APIs, but then you can render it to the console. Of course, it's going to be very, very pixelated, but it's in some scenarios, it really gives a nice aesthetic to your console apps, having a logotype or something like that in the help screen.
I did play around plugging a few PNGs, so like the .NET Oxford logo, my company logo, the Everstack logo, and trying a few different ones. So that was quite fun. And I like the way you can like rotate them and do other stuff to it as well.
Yeah, I'm really happy with that. The only problem I've been having with it is that since the terminal size normally are quite limited, like 80 characters wide or greater, but some images get really big when you try to render them to the console, even if you shrink them. So
yeah, well, I guess something that's probably more common in like console outputs for console applications is ASCII art, which you've got Figlet support, I believe.
Yeah, I've added very basic Figlet support. There is a plan to expand on that, but right now you can load Figlet fonts and you can render them, but you can't really control much of the Figlet rendering yet. But if anyone wants to submit a PR, I'm very grateful.
Well, as I say, I'll include a link to the show notes in that. So, PR's most welcome. With .NET Core and .NET 5 being cross-platform, does this mean that presumably Spectre console will happily run on like other things like Raspberry Pis, or maybe?
Yeah, it should run everywhere where .NET runs. Right now, it's a .NET Standard 2.0 and .NET 5 library. So if you can run that, you can use Spectre console. Of course, it always depends on what terminal you're using. But if you're not running on Windows, I can pretty much guarantee that it will work as expected.
Oh, nice. Are there any scenarios where you'd recommend someone writing a .NET console app shouldn't be using Spectre console? Is there any like outliers where it's not compatible for some reason?
No, I've actually put a lot of time into the library to have fallback for unsupported scenarios. For example, if you're using Spectre console in a terminal that doesn't support ANSI escape codes, for example, it will fall back to using the system console APIs instead. Some features will, of course, be limited in those scenarios, like bold text and stuff like that. That's not supported, but your application will work. All the widgets will render as they're supposed to, like tables and grids and stuff like that. So if the user of your application runs a old operating system, it will still work, but it might not be as pretty as it is on your machine. But on Linux and Mac, it should be no problem at all.
Very nice. I think like with Windows Terminal and everything, and I'm just like finding that I'm using the command line a lot more. I've always been a heavy command line user, but having multiple tab support and panes, I'm using the command line a lot heavier. So I guess as a side effect to that, I'm kind of defaulting much more to writing console apps for utility applications that I write myself. And I feel like I want to go back and look through my code directory and find all the console applications and just plug this in because it just looks so cool.
I've actually been doing that since I published Spectre Console. Been going back and prettifying stuff I haven't touched for years, and it's really satisfactory doing that.
Do you get the same thing that I get when you look back at code that you wrote like 6 months ago or 2 years ago? It's like, oh, I did not write this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yesterday I was looking at code I wrote like a month ago, and I got that feeling. Like, were I drunk when I wrote this?
I guess it's a good sign because it means you're always improving and getting better and learning, which is one of the things I love about this job.
Yeah, hopefully.
Unless you were drunk when writing the code, I don't know.
I mean, it's not an impossibility. No, just kidding.
So when I was looking through the documentation, there's also something you've got called Spectre CLI. So I've kind of like in the past, I've always used, there's a NuGet package called Command Line Parser for doing this. But giving all the amazing stuff we've discussed so far about Spectre, and I think this is, as I've said, this is something I'm going to be using a lot moving forward with console applications. It sounds like switching to Spectre for command line parsing too is the way forward. When we chatted about it briefly last week, you said it was quite opinionated.
Oh yeah. No, it's super opinionated. I mean, most open source projects are opinionated in some way, I guess, because it's always you want to solve a specific problem and you have an idea how you want to solve it, and it might not correlate with how others want to solve that problem. Most people have written a command line parser at some point, I think. There's like 1 billion of them, but it's always difficult to find one that I like. So like 2 years ago, I wrote one myself, and I had some ideas of making it type safe composition of commands. So I've now included it in the Spectre console library, because I use them both a lot, and Spectre CLI, which it was called, it actually depended on Spectre console, so it was just easier to move it into the Spectre console library. There are really great libraries out there for command parsing. There's no problem mixing and matching, using Spectre console for like prettifying output and stuff like that, and using something else.
Well, I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with a library being opinionated, because I think some libraries where there's 20 different ways to do the same thing, I would say that's far worse. So I'll definitely be having a play with this.
Let me know how it works for you.
Yeah, definitely. Do you actually get much help from the community with this library? Just looking at your GitHub page, actually, I can see that there's a few contributors. I think one person was doing a lot of documentation translations, which sounds super useful when opening up your library to more users.
Oh yeah, and I don't have the GitHub page open now, but I got contributions for Persian translation and I think it's Chinese as well. That's really nice. It opens up the library for more users. But I've actually brought on another maintainer of the library. His name is Phil Scott. So he's been helping out a lot with maintenance and stuff like that. He's doing a really great job with answering questions and submitting PRs and helping me maintain the library. So Phil, if you're hearing this, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, fantastic. I think a lot of the time with open source, users forget that the person that's developing the library or whatever it is, they forget that the person on the other end that's doing it is doing it in their free time for no money. They're doing it because they've got a passion for software development. They want to help people out and share what they're building. And I don't know what your experience has been, but you get some issues raised where people, they're almost like they're speaking to a business and they're expecting it to be a certain way. Or to me, that's just rude. And everyone needs to respect the fact that people doing open source are doing it for free in their spare time when they've got families.
Yeah, we've seen that, not a lot, but we've seen that in the Cake project at sometimes. People who they raise an issue about something that maybe isn't something that we consider an issue or something that is by design. And they say things like, okay, but then I won't use this. Okay, don't use it. It's okay. We won't force you. So there's always people trying to make demands and stuff like that. We haven't had a lot of problems with that, but it happens sometimes. When it happens, you get really frustrated because, like you say, you do this in your spare time, and yeah.
I think the thing is a lot of people that are most vocal about negative things. And then when they're having a good experience, they're happy, but they don't say anything. To our listeners, if you're happy about open source projects, let the maintainers know. It's so, so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Sometimes when I find something that I really like, sometimes I open an issue just to tell the maintainers that I really like this, what you're doing. Because I know that when someone appreciates what you do in your free time, because I mean, most open source project could have stayed on someone's hard drive, but they decided to open source it and make it publicly available and then support it to some degree. So a thank you is a very nice, it's free, and it's a very nice gesture towards the people that maintains the stuff that you use.
Yeah, definitely. Out of interest, when you raise those thank you issues, who closes the issue?
Do you mean like on the maintainer team?
Yes. Do they say something back and then close the issue?
Yeah, so sometimes. I mean, to be fair, I haven't done it a lot, but sometimes when I'm like blown away by a project, it's like I must tell someone. And on Twitter, I try to encourage people writing stuff as well.
It feels like almost that's a piece of functionality missing from GitHub, isn't it? It's almost like you want to be able to type a message to the maintainer to say thank you, but not have an issue where someone's got to close it away, I guess.
Yeah, that would be a really nice feature. Just like a thank you for your hard work.
I guess there's this new GitHub sponsors thing as well, which maybe that's their way of almost doing that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. But then there's this monetary aspect of it, and
that's true. You just want to say thank you, and rather than having potentially lots of negative and no positive, just having a way of saying thank you. It saved me so much time. It's just amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, it would be. I think that's nice.
So do you have any future plans for Spectre Console?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of plans. We will try to stabilize stuff and release a 1.0 at some point. I think most of the widgets that needs to be there have been implemented, but there's always like corner cases and some things that doesn't render correct in some scenarios, and we have a couple of those bugs open. But after that, I think we want to release a 1.0 and start thinking about how we can take the project further.
Fantastic. Now, whilst you are here, it would be a bit remiss of me to have the author of Cake on the show and us not talk about Cake at all, especially now you just hit V1. So it's surprising by how many topics on a software development podcast can actually end up making me hungry. But and Simon Painter, I'm talking to you too, but he'll know what I mean. But to be honest, it really surprised me when I saw that Cake had only just hit V1, because I used to use it quite a few years ago, and even then it seemed pretty mature. We even had Gary Hewan Park join us in person in the .NET user group I run, .NET Oxford, back in, I think it was 2018, talking all about it. And I haven't used it recently, but I'm quite keen on discussing what's new in V1 of Cake. But I guess we should probably take a step back and explain what Cake is for those that haven't used it.
Yeah, sure. Cake is a build orchestration tool with a C# DSL. So you use it to orchestrate all the things around your build. Like, I mean, if a project is super simple, you probably won't need build orchestration. But if you want to package NuGet packages and you want to build stuff for different platforms and copy files and create NuGet packages, it's supposed to replace PowerShell and CMD files and MS Build targets that you would normally write to do that, and do that in C# instead. So you have different tasks that execute, and tasks can depend on each other. So there's two flavors of cake. One is the script part, and one is the where you write your scripts in a console application using something called cake frosting. Yeah.
The one thing I really liked about it was just the fact that it was in C#. I do bits of PowerShell, but most of my day is spent doing C# and .NET. So to be able to jump over to the build scripts and carry on using something I'm familiar with, I just found that quite powerful. And then I could, if I needed to use things like link, obviously most build scenarios don't require that, but for some more complicated cases, to be able to just use language functionality made that super powerful. I've heard frosting mentioned before, but I've not actually used that before.
Yeah, it's been around for quite some time now, to be honest, since 2017, I think. Just before .NET Core was released. Frosting brings the power of cake scripts to console application. So instead of having a build.cake file, you have a regular C# project where you reference cake frosting project, which will reference the normal cake dependencies. And then you define your tasks you just inherit from frosting task class for your tasks and override a method. And then you can compose tasks like that and just run it, and it will.
Right, I see. So if you've got a NuGet package which has MS Build tasks in there, could you then combine in the same NuGet package your MS Build tasks and some cake tasks as well?
You mean to kick off the cake build?
Or to do different things. Maybe you've got a code base which is, you've got some complicated builds and you've got a bunch of MS Build tasks and you want to slowly move over to using cake. Using frosting, could you sort of use a bit of both and then slowly migrate it across?
I haven't thought about it, to be honest. Interesting scenario. You could probably build a custom MS Build task that invokes the either cake script or the cake frosting builds, I guess, as an interim solution.
It was probably a silly question. I was kind of thinking out loud because I know
there's no such thing as a silly question.
I've done bits of projects before which have used MS Build tasks where I've written
my condolences.
I know. I'm still having nightmares, but
no. But in all fairness, when a custom MS Build task works and you don't have to touch it, it's perfect because it becomes so transparent. But when there's a problem and you forgot how it works and you have to find something is not building in the correct order, and having nightmares about that.
I remember there's a tool, MS
Build log?
Yes, that's it. I first got introduced to this by Stuart Lang, who did a lightning talk at .NET Oxford about it. So yeah, MS Build log, and it helped me out quite a lot because the stuff I was doing at the time, I just found that I could just plug it straight in.
I think it's Kirill Osenkov who created that. He works at Microsoft. It's a really good tool. MS Build can produce binary log files, and MS Bin log reads those binary files and can render the different targets, and you can search for outputs. And I've used it a lot, and it saved me so much time. I can really recommend it. Maybe that should be my dev tip.
As I mentioned, I think Stuart Lang did a lightning talk about it at .NET Oxford, and I'm pretty sure it was recorded. So if it was, I'll include a link to that in the show notes as well. Well, you mentioned dev tips. Shall we start dev tips? And you can't get off that easily. That can't be your dev tip. Nice try, though.
Okay, I have another dev tip. My dev tip would be Oh My Posh 3, the terminal customizable prompt. It's super nice. I've been using something called Starship before, but I recently switched to Oh My Posh, and it's so good. I recommend everyone who wants a pretty terminal prompt to check it out.
Yes, I think at the moment I'm using something called Oh My, I don't know how to pronounce it, Zeus, ZSH.
Oh, yeah.
So, which is probably very, very similar, but yeah, it's so nice when you can, especially that combined with PoshGit.
Oh, yeah.
So you get all that. The Git shows what branch you're on, it shows what changes you've got auto completion. Combining all this stuff together, the command line experience can be amazing.
PostGit is so nice, like you say. Just when you're looking for a branch, just being able to like press tab until you find it. So nice.
Although saying that, I've recently got a new machine and I've got all my terminals set up again with my Zoosh, or however you pronounce it, ZSH. And the autocompletion, the tab to autocomplete is the only thing that's not, everything else is the same, but that's not working. So I need to work out what I've not installed that's not letting me do that autocompletion. But yeah, it's just I think Git on the command line would not be the same without PostGit. So my dev tip, and whilst we're talking a lot about CLIs, I will stick on topic. And you will already know this, and most heavy command line interface users will already know this already. But for those that don't, both Bash and PowerShell have a very useful keyboard shortcut, Control-R, which enters something called reverse history search mode, allowing you to type and search your command history. And given that a lot of the time when using the CLI, we're repeating the same command we've already typed lots of times, especially when those commands might have lots of arguments that you may not remember. I find this saves me an awful lot of time. So I'm all the time I was pressing Control-R, then typing a subset of a command I've written in the past. And it just makes doing stuff on the command line so much faster.
That's a great tip. I don't use that, but I will definitely start checking it out. Oh, testing it out right now. It's actually quite nice. Huh. Nice.
One thing you can do is whichever shell you use, I think it's hashed for both, for comments. If there's a command with lots of arguments and you use it a lot, if at the very end of the line you put a hash and then some word which, almost like a tag, because it's a comment so it won't affect your command, but then later on when you're doing Control-R, you can Control-R and type that tag, so which will take you straight back to that line number. There's all these little command line tips. Another good one is if you do CD space hyphen, that takes you back to the previous directory you're on. So if you do it a few times, it's going to go jump backwards and forwards, which is quite nice. We discovered, I didn't realize this, but there was, last year we had Scott Hanselman at one of the .NET Oxford events, and Scott Hanselman's brilliant with interacting with the audience in a talk. He gets everyone involved, and that got mentioned. I can't remember. It might have been me that mentioned it in one of the conversations about the CD hyphen. And then a few of us were talking about it and playing around with different stuff. And then someone in the audience discovered that, and I think this was just PowerShell, I think, not on Bash. I'm not sure which way around it was. But CD plus went forward in the directory history and CD minus went backwards. Again, in the show notes, I'll include a link to this Scott Hanselman event, because this was definitely recorded. But it was just really interesting how he was experimenting and getting everyone involved. There was a few different things where we discovered things mid-talk, and he would ask someone from the Microsoft team, he would open up Teams and ask a quick question about it whilst we're halfway through doing a talk. Amazing. And I don't know how much of this was he knew the answer full well, but he was trying to make it look more involved, or whether it was just generally we were, as a group, discovering things as the talk was going on. But it would definitely made it, as a member of the audience, a lot more engaging. You felt much more involved. So that was such a great talk.
I will check it out if you put the link in the show note.
Yes, I'll include all the things we've spoken about. So before we wrap up, do you have anything else you'd like to mention?
No.
No, that's okay. You don't have to.
I don't know.
You'll think of all the things afterwards.
Like normally. No, I think I'm fine.
Cool. So a big thank you, Patrik, for joining us. It's been amazing having you on.
Oh, thank you. It was really fun talking with you.
Yeah, you too. And a big thank you, everyone, for listening. A quick reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Everstack, which is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please do help me spread the word on social media. I normally use the tag unhandledexception, and I can be found on Twitter at Dracan, Dracan, and my DMs are wide open. And my blog, danclark.com, has links to all my social stuff too. We will include links to all the things we've mentioned today in the show notes, which can be found on unhandledexceptionpodcast.com.